What are some of the most common mistakes that you see? Because when you get called into audit,
Yeah.
there must be some big things that stick out right away.
So a lot of the designs that I see, first of all, they are way too content heavy, like way, way too content heavy. So even the content hasn't been distilled enough to be able to help somebody to focus on those very transferable skills, behaviors,
Mm,
knowledge that they're looking for. So it's a lot of filler content that has to go. That's number one. Number two is a lot of times the narratives, the scripts, it's not speaking with somebody, it's speaking at somebody.
yes.
And that is very traditional. And I'm going to caveat the rest of this conversation by saying that because most of us, grew up in a very traditional educational system where we were never taught how to learn, we were certainly never taught about our brains and how they work, is all we've done is we've transferred 20 plus, in some cases 30 plus years of what you've known from the past into your current behaviors, habits when it comes to your
Yes.
own learning and the learning design. So this is so instilled in us to do it very methodically as if we were lesson planning. And lesson planning is very different than learning design.
Mm,
So, so that's sort of the offense number one is the content part, but then the offense number two is quite often it's not the thread isn't being pulled through. So because we are still sort of traditionally looking at this is module one, and we're going to talk about, let's say we're going to talk about communication because we're going to talk about soft skills right now. And this is module on communication. This is about delivering feedback. Okay, great. We're done with feedback. Okay, now we're going over to listening. How do you, I'm like, wow, okay. It's like,
we
boom,
just kind of
boom.
set that down over here and picked up this one. Yeah.
Right. How do we create the journey?
Yes.
And the journeys are not being created well enough. And then we've got everything that we can to utilize the brain itself. So quite often in these designs, especially when they're organizational designs, is that we're jumping right into the work transfer in the work environment. We're not contextualizing it first for the human being to have that understanding of how does this impact me as the human being, and then how does that transfer into my work.
Mm,
It's instantly let's go right to the environment of which the transfer is required. But if somebody can't grasp that first for themselves, and if we can't say, when we talk about things like emotional regulation, emotional monitoring and regulation, you know, well, how does that show up in my personal life first? How can I identify what that feels like, what that sounds like?
yeah.
And then I can understand a little bit more tangibly the context in which I need to transfer into my work environment. Now,
Mm,
that's not always the case. We're talking about soft skills. It's very broad and generalized. If we were talking about very specific things like a developer who needs to learn a new coding program, or if we're talking about people in a manufacturing plant who have very different environments and obstacles, we're designing in different ways. But we are very heavily leaning on the context being established first. And within that context, it's how do we use emotional stimulation without overdoing it? How do we use novelty, which the brain loves? The brain loves novelty,
mm,
but you press on that button too much, and that's all the brain's going to look for.
yes.
And knowing those things is the brilliance of scientific learning design, is how do we best use the operational system because we understand it a bit in order to then, like I said, harmonize with the methodologies and build out a brilliant learning program. Most of the time learning like that has never, not never, but like a lot of the times people haven't experienced learning like that. And that's the brilliance too, is we can teach people through our designs how to learn better as well and how to cultivate the skills.